A Conferência Igrejas Saudáveis Online apresenta para esta segunda plenária o pastor Rick Warren, pastor líder da Igreja Saddleback, no sul da Califórnia, Estados Unidos. Rick Warren implementou o Purpose Drive Network, uma aliança global de pastores de mais de 160 países. Fundou também o pastors.com, uma comunidade interativa online que oferece sermões, fóruns e outros recursos de prática para pastores. Mentor do Plano Peace Global, uma estratégia de Deus revelada ao pastor Rick Warren para que a igreja leve o evangelho de forma integral a todas as pessoas. Tem mestrado em divindade e doutorado em ministério. É autor dos livros Uma Igreja com Propósitos e Uma Vida com Propósitos. Prepare seu coração para o que Deus tem para nos falar por meio do pastor Rick Warren.
Hi, I'm Rick Warren, author of The Purpose-Driven Church and Purpose-Driven Life, founder of Saddleback Church in Southern California in America, and the founder of the Global Peace Plan. And I'd like to talk to you very briefly about why Rwanda has become the first national model of the peace plan, a little bit of the history and a little bit of some of the factors we see of why purpose-driven peace plan is working so well on a national level in this amazing country. Let me go a little bit background first. In my life, I've only had three visions. In 1979, I had a vision of building a model healthy church, which later became Saddleback Church. I planted it in Southern California with one member. My wife was the only member, and we began in our home with 7 people. Fast forward it, 35 years later, Saddleback is now a church with over 100,000 names on our church roll in 16 locations with campuses on 4 different continents. We have Saddleback in Buenos Aires, we have Saddleback Manila, Saddleback Hong Kong, Saddleback Berlin, as well as a dozen Saddleback churches in Southern California. And in the last 35 years, we have now baptized over 40,000 believers, 40,000, which is an amazing thing. In 1981, God gave me a vision of serving other pastors. And we began to first invite pastors to our church who would call up and say, can we come and study what you're doing? And I did that. I'd say, buy your own lunch, and we'd do that. And then it got so big, we started doing seminars. And now, over 35 years, over 500,000 pastors and church leaders have been trained from 164 countries, including every different denomination. Here in America, over 35,000 churches have done 40 Days of Purpose and many of our other campaigns. And so it's been a great privilege to train pastors around the world. Then in 2003, God gave me the vision of the Peace Plan Initiative, of planting churches, equipping leaders, assisting the poor, caring for the sick, educating the next generation, 5 things that Jesus did. And I'm actually more confident about this vision than the other 2. We've been testing the prototype for about 10 years. We've had over 26,000 members of Saddleback serve overseas in the Peace Plan in 197 countries. So I've learned 1,000 ways that don't work. Someday we'll write a book on that. But when we launched the Peace Plan, one of the things we began looking for was a small country where we could make a big impact. We said, could we find a small country where we would model the Peace Plan working with governments and business for the development of an entire nation? And honestly, we were looking at a lot of different countries. Dominican Republic, we were looking at Namibia, we were looking at Haiti, many different small countries around the world. And Rwanda actually found us. I didn't find them, they found us. And the background on this is President Paul Kagame, who was the liberator after ending the genocide in 1994, when over 1 million Rwandans were killed in about 100 days. He was visiting a Christian friend in America, and he saw my book on a table, and it said The Purpose-Driven Life. And President Kagame said to this friend of mine, Joe, said, hey, what's this book about? He said, well, it's about living a purpose-driven life. And President Paul Kagame said, well, I'm a man of purpose. And he said, I'd like to read this. So Joe gave him my book. About a month later, I received a letter from President Paul Kagame of Rwanda saying, Dear Rick, I've read your book, The Purpose-Driven Life, and I'm a man of purpose, and I want to invite you to come to Rwanda to help us rebuild our nation after the genocide and build a purpose-driven nation. And so I came and I accepted the invitation. The first 2 or 3 times I came to Rwanda, I really just listened. I brought a yellow pad, and for days I just sat and I listened to people, and I took notes and I took notes and I listened and I took notes. And I wanted to assess the leadership. I said, I will only come to this country if the church leaders want me. We only go where we are invited. We don't ever force ourselves into a country. And so if the church leaders want us, then we will come. And interesting, one of the common comments that people said is, a lot of times they said pastors come from the West and they want to come with all the solutions, but you came to listen, and that makes you different. And I literally took pages of notes. And after about 3 visits, we knew that we received this invitation from the churches of Rwanda. And I said, well, you need to put together a national steering team, a national steering committee, a national steering board for the peace plan and purpose-driven strategy in Rwanda on a national level. These leaders were very wise, and they put together a team that involved almost 100% of the churches, putting together a leadership team that represented every major network and denomination in Rwanda. And they issued me a formal invitation, said the churches of Rwanda would love to partner with the Church of Saddleback in Southern California, and we would love to meet you, and we would love to develop a purpose-driven nation and become the first peace plan nation. So, of course, I was very, very excited about this. And after 3 visits, we gratefully accepted their gracious invitation to come and build a partnership. One of the principles of the peace plan is when Jesus sent people out, he says, when you go to a village, he said, find the man of peace. And he said, if you find the man of peace and he welcomes you, then you stay there and you don't move around. You don't move from house to house. Just stay there with that. He said, if he blesses you, you bless him back. And he said, if you don't find a man of peace, you dust the dust off your shoes and you go to the next village, because you can always find somebody to work with. That's why we call it the peace plan, because it starts with the man of peace. Now, who is the man of peace? Well, in the first place, the man of peace doesn't have to be a man. It can be a woman. Sometimes I found that the elderly grandmother in a village was the woman of peace. And the person of peace is someone who is influential, and they are open. They are receptive to what you want to do. They're influential and they're receptive. And so you can find a man of peace almost anywhere. I found men of peace in churches, pastors who are men of peace. I found them in denominations. I found them in businesses. I found them in governments. I found presidents and prime ministers who are men of peace. And Jesus says, find the man of peace and start your ministry there and don't move around. So he said, if we find a man of peace here, we're going to come to Rwanda and we're going to stay long term. This is not drive-by missions where you go in and you're there for a year and then you leave. No, you go and you stay for long-term development, long-term. We've now been in Rwanda, as of this taping, about 13 years. And we have seen massive changes in the nation because we've been able to stay there. And when you build relationships, when you have integrity, it gets better every year. Well, I found that President Kagame was a man of peace. And I found that many of the leaders of our networks and denominations were men of peace. And we found women of peace, and we found business leaders, and we were all welcomed. And so when there was this unanimity, then we said, okay, we will come. I then actually invited President Paul Kagame to America and invited him to come and speak out at the 25th anniversary of our church in Angel Stadium, where we had 60,000 people for our 25th anniversary. And we publicly launched the peace plan in April of that year at Angel Stadium, saying we were developing a long-term relationship with Rwanda. And we said we will begin to send our members to come not to do stuff for you, but to teach you, to train you, and to enable local churches. We made it very clear we will work through the local churches. And so one of the first things we did is we got purpose-driven church, purpose-driven life translated into Kinyarwanda. And we printed it, and we planned all of the churches joined together to do a nationwide 40 days of purpose. This was the most amazing thing, to have an entire nation studying 40 days of purpose together. We did it in places where people couldn't read. People would stand up in a church at a certain time every day and read that daily chapter aloud so people could read it and discuss it in their small groups. We put it on radio stations. We posted it in newspapers, the daily readings. We did all kinds of things. Over 4,000 churches did 40 days of purpose. Now, it's interesting. One of the things that happened is when we started doing 40 days of purpose, so many hundreds and thousands of people were saved. They were baptizing. The churches were baptizing every week. But not only that, many churches had a lot of people who were living together without benefit of marriage, had never been formally married. And so many people came under conviction during 40 days of purpose that they wanted to get married, that had been living together, that the government actually had to send licensing agents out to the villages, to the churches, because I think there were 800 or 900 couples that were married during 40 days of purpose who had just been living together. It began to change the moral climate of the community. Everybody began to talk the same language. Once we had established purpose-driven, then we were ready to establish the peace plan. Now, follow me very closely on this. You cannot put peace plan into unhealthy churches. You have to have healthy churches first. So for the first few years of Rwanda, we did not actually emphasize the peace plan. We emphasized building a healthy church on the purpose-driven model. Using 40 days of purpose, teaching people how to implement the class system, Class 101, discovering membership in the body of Christ, Class 201, discovering spiritual maturity, Class 301, discovering my ministry in my church, Class 401, discovering my mission in the world. We began to translate these classes and put them into the churches. We began to teach pastors about preaching. We began to teach them about small groups. We began to teach them about children's ministry, purpose-driven students ministry, children's ministry, purpose-driven music ministry. And literally over 4,000 churches have participated in some form of a 3-year training. We actually presented certificates to these pastors who had completed 3 years of training. In fact, at one point, we held a national rally in the stadium, in Amahoro Stadium, the national stadium. President Paul Kagame came. The pastors who had finished their 3 years of training wore caps and gowns, came across the stage and were handed a diploma by the president of this country, saying, you have been certified as a purpose-driven pastor, having completed the 3 years of training. This was fundamental to everything else we were going to do. You got to get common language about small groups, about membership, maturity, ministry, mission, common language about community, congregation, core, cell, and commissioned. And all of the terminologies and all of the training, we began to do training in the local churches. Our role was not to be the government, not to be the business, but be in the churches. And my primary role was to raise the visibility of the churches and say, you cannot do national development without the church, because the church is the people. In many villages, it's the only organization in the village. It is the only distribution center in the village. It is the only source of credibility in the village. And so we began to raise the visibility of pastors in the nation. And I remember a very important turning point when President Paul Kagame, in a nationwide speech in Amahoro Stadium, he said, "We learned that our national goals could be reached quicker, and we learned that our national development could be done faster if we would engage the churches." Now, he did it the exact right way. He gave his blessing to the church. The president gave his blessing to the church, and then he just stepped back and let the steering committee run the entire program. It was not government run. We don't want the government running churches. We don't want the churches running the government. Each has a different role. But he gave his blessing, he gave it visibility, and the churches began to grow, get healthier and stronger and stronger and stronger. And then as they began to go strong, we began to introduce different peace projects, like healthcare projects in the Kabuye, the Karanji district, and like savings groups, and like training for farmers and training for seeds and how to double your crop on half the land, and training for student ministries and youth ministries and all of these different things. We even took the city planner of the city, Saddleback Churches in, who was the city planner of Rancho Santa Margarita, sent him to Kigali for 1 year. And he worked there to reorganize all of the streets and the stoplights and the traffic flow system in a city, a capital, that was growing by great bounds and leaps and bounds. One of the interesting examples, I could give you many examples, that the government asked us to be a part of was the orphan care problem. When Rwanda had a genocide and 1 million of its adults out of 10 million people were killed, it left 1 million orphans. Can you imagine 10% of your country being orphans? This is an enormous problem. Street orphans, and of course, all of the orphanages were packed to the gills. And the president and the Ministry of Health came to us, and the Ministry of Gender came and said, "Can you help us? Can we work on the orphan problem?" And I said, "Yes, but you need to understand, we don't believe in orphanages." They said, "Well, great, neither do we." He said, "We believe every orphan believes in a family. We don't believe in orphanages because orphanages are a Western-style approach. The word orphanage is not in the Bible because it's not a biblical term. It was invented by the West. And you ask any orphan, would you rather be in a family or in an institution? They would always rather be in a family. So in a list of 99 things of what to do with orphans, I would put an orphanage down at number 99. It's essential in some little areas, like for transmission from street care to then into the homes. You can't always go directly to the home. But we said, we set a goal with the government to make Rwanda the first nation in the world with no orphanages. And over the last 13 years, we have been systematically helping churches train their members to take in orphans as foster kids and as in adoptions. And practically every church has some kind of adoption ministry. Every pastor has helped with adoptions. A lot of pastors have adopted themselves. And we are now down to about 3 final orphanages left. And hopefully those will be closed within the next year. This is an amazing thing. Rwanda will be the first country in the world to be a country with no orphanages. That's a direct result of the peace plan working through local churches in a goal that the government sanctioned and said, this is a good thing, we want this to happen. When I first met with the steering committee of the Rwanda Purpose-Driven Ministries and Peace Plan, and they encouraged me to meet with the president. And I asked the president, I said, the peace plan has 5 letters. Promote reconciliation, plant churches, equip servant leaders, assist the poor, care for the sick, educate the next generation. Rwanda has 5 provinces. Let us know which letter you want us to do in each province, and we'll develop a project in those areas. The president's wife, First Lady Jeanette Kagame, asked us to develop the healthcare initiative, or C, Care for the Sick, in the southern region, in the western province, where there had been 3 hospitals, but they were understaffed for about 2 million people in that province, and very, very few trained medical facilities. And so when we went to that area, we found that there were 3 hospitals. By the way, 2 of them were church-based hospitals, and so you wouldn't even have those if it weren't for the church. But they were understaffed and underfunded, and could not possibly go to every village. And there's no way you're going to have a doctor in every village. And so then we did research and found out that there were 18 clinics in the Western province. 16 of them, by the way, church-based, which is better than 3 hospitals, because it's only 1 day's walk instead of 2 days' walk to get to these hospitals. But we said that's still not a good enough health care. And I said, watch this. And so I put up a map of the Western province and showed it with dots, dots all over the area. And I said, here are the nearly 700 churches in the Western province of Rwanda. Now, where would you like to get your health care? 2 days walk to the hospital, 1 day's walk to the clinic, or 5 minutes walk to your nearest church? And people said, we get it. We understand it. So we went to the pastors of the Western district. This is just one of the many examples of peace projects that we're doing in Rwanda. We went to the pastors of the Western province and said, would some of you volunteer to be the experiment? We're going to try to teach your people how to do basic health care, because you're never going to have a doctor in your village. You're going to have to train your own people to do basic health care. 18 pastors said, we're in. We will do this. We want to be a part of this. And we said, great. Each of you pick 2 people from your church that we're going to train. Remember, the Great Commission is teach them to do the things I've told you, not do it for them, teach them to do. We're going to train your members how to do basic health care. So 18 pastors, each picked 2 people, so they're 36 people. By the way, the 2 Muslim mosques came to us and said, we know we're not Christians, but would you mind training us too? We said, of course we will. This is a human issue, not a religious issue. And I said, now, we're a Christian organization. We're going to still have Bible study. We're going to still sing Christian worship songs. We're not going to water down our faith, but you're welcome to sit in on the training. And so they did, and they wept when we allowed them to be a part of that. They said, nobody's treated us like this before. Well, we began to train these 40 people. The first thing, we began to train them in basic health care, like sanitation, how to do basic sanitation, wash your hands for basic sanitation, how to hang out the sheets to dry in the sun so that there was, the sheets were sanitized. Then we teach them how to dress a wound, then how to stitch a wound, how to set a bone, and even simple, more complex things like how to administer ARVs, antiretrovirals, for AIDS. As they began to learn these basic healthcare techniques, and as they began to learn basic healthcare lessons that they would teach, we would assign each healthcare worker, community healthcare worker, 7 families to visit in a week. And they would go visit these people, said, you're like a country doctor. You will make house calls and you'll check up on them. Well, it was so effective that those 40 were very, very successful, and word got out that we need more of these. So the 40 helped us train 40 more. And now we had 80 healthcare workers working through the churches. Then we had those 80 helped us train 80 more, 160. Those 160 helped us train 160 more, 320, and then 640. You can see the exponential growth of this about every three or 4 months. About 2 years ago, I went and held a rally for all of the Peace Plan healthcare workers working through churches, each of them with 7 families to visit. And there were, I think, nearly 4,000 people at that rally who were being trained. We pay them nothing. They're all volunteers. They are happy to do it. And then they began to come back to us and say, our people aren't sick all the time. What else can you train us to do? And so we changed their name from community healthcare workers. They actually changed the name themselves to just servants of the community, to community servants. We taught them how to do savings banks, how to create co-ops. And all of this is through the church so that the glory goes to the local church. The church is becoming the centers of the community again because we're offering them clean water through the churches, training through the churches, education through the churches, savings deposits through the churches, healthcare through the churches, all the things that traditionally the church has done. When I first explained this to a group of business leaders in America one time, President Bush had invited me to be the closing speaker at a global summit on malaria. After it was over, Melinda Gates, Bill Gates' wife, came up to me. She said, "I get it, Rick. The church could be the distribution center for healthcare." And I said, "Melinda, the church has been the center of distribution for healthcare for 2,000 years. I said, people don't realize we invented the hospital. The church invented the hospital. It's our idea. The government didn't invent the hospital. The church has been doing healthcare 2,000 years longer than any government. The church has been doing education 2,000 years longer than any government. The church has been doing training 2,000 years longer than any government. It's our right. We are the center of the community." This concept has caught on in Rwanda, and the churches, like a mighty force for good, are raising the economic level of the community. You know that since the peace plan has been in Rwanda, this is a UN statistic, 1 million people out of poverty in Rwanda. Now, not all of that's attributed to the peace plan, but we did have a part in it because people, when they come to Christ, they stop drinking, they get off of drugs, they get married, they get responsible, they get good jobs, they start growing, and together the churches are playing their role in the transformation of a nation from third world nation to first world nation in one generation, fully developed nation. And it's very exciting. I'm excited about Rwanda because in the last 2 years, Rwanda has been named the safest country on the continent of Africa. The safest country in the continent of Africa. I have been in almost every country in the world, and it's, I think, the only country I've ever been in where I've never been asked for a bribe because there's a zero tolerance for corruption. And remember, one of the big goals of the peace plan is equip ethical leaders, servant leaders who fight corruption, and we do that. All of these things have happened, and the nation is being transformed, and the churches are being transformed. Are they perfect? No. Do they have a long way to go? Yes. Are we working together? Yeah, absolutely. And we work church to church so that the glory does not go to Saddleback, the glory does not go to the government, the glory goes to that local church. Now, why is purpose-driven and peace plan working so well in Rwanda on a national level? Nowhere else in the world is it this effective. And God knew exactly where he wanted this to happen. And I didn't plan it, but it was in the plan of God. Said the maturity of the spiritual leaders, the unity of the churches, the openness of the government, and fourth, the size of the country is that it was not a big country, which allowed us to make a big impression very, very quickly. Obviously, if we had gone to a much larger country, it takes much longer time. Rwanda is an amazing story of spiritual and economic growth happening at the same time. And I just want to affirm the steering committee and the model churches and the purpose-driven trainers. These are men that you can invite to your church to train your people, to train your congregation to do the Rwanda model of purpose-driven and peace plan. We've already sent Rwandans into other countries to do church planting on the continent of Africa because we say we must care about the whole world, not just here. Now, when you visit some of these churches, you're going to say, well, these are just normal, ordinary churches. That's the point. Sometimes people will come to Saddleback and they say, well, anybody could do that. That's the point. Anybody can do it. This is not a strategy for superstars. It's a strategy that anybody who's willing to have the discipline to do it Jesus' way can be a model. And again, no model is perfect. Many of our churches in Rwanda, we have 4,000, I would say, who are all in. Doesn't mean they're all there. It means they're all in. What does that mean? They've made the commitment to start the journey of becoming a purpose-driven church. They may not be all there yet, but it takes time to grow a healthy church. But they're all in. They've made the commitment. They've said, this is the way we're going. We're going to build on worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry, and evangelism in a systematic, sequential way. And they've made that commitment. They're all in, and now they're going to be all there in the years and days ahead. I want to challenge you to make a similar commitment. You may not be all there yet. You're just learning this from the start. But I want to challenge you as you look at what's happening in Rwanda to make a commitment to say, I want to be all in. And say, God, do it again. Do it again in my church. Do it again in my village. Do it again in my community. Do it again in my city. Do it again in my nation. The Bible says the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show himself strong in the behalf of those whose hearts are perfect toward him. 2 Chronicles 16:9. God is looking for people to use. And if you get usable, God will wear you out. I invite you to join us in the purpose-driven and peace journey that started in Rwanda, a model that we believe it can be reproducible. You can't say, well, it can't be done. My church or my community or my nation is poor. No, nobody was poorer than Rwanda after the genocide. They had nothing. And out of the ashes comes a new glory of revival and renewal, just like Ezekiel and the dry bones coming together. I once asked Bishop John Rusciano, what is your approach to purpose-driven and the peace plan? And he said, we're preaching hope standing on the bones of the past. I close with this, preaching hope standing on the bones of the past. Maybe your past has not been so good in your church or your community. Maybe things have not gone well in your country. But preaching hope, standing on the bones of the past, looking forward to the future, being willing to be mature and involve other churches, the unity of the churches, being involved in reaching out with hands of peace to the government, and being willing to let every member be a minister, one of the fundamental rules of purpose-driven ministry, that everybody has something to commit to and to offer in the world. If you'll do these things, you can see what God wants to do in your life, in your church, and your ministry. I'll be praying for you. God bless you.